17 years ago, a boy saved a kitten from the rain. Now, with her final breaths, the old cat will cross streets, brave dangers, and defy time itself to find him one last time. Misty's world had grown smaller with each passing year. Where, once she could leap from floor to bookshelf in a single graceful bound, now even the journey from her plush bed to the sun-warmed patch by the bay window required careful planning. Her joints protested each movement, the arthritis that had crept into her hips and shoulders, making every step a conscious effort. The morning ritual began as it always did, with a slow, deliberate stretch that started at the tip of her tail and travelled up her spine in increments. First, the right forepaw extended, claws flexing against the worn Persian rug, then the left, a careful arch of the back, each vertebra popping softly. Finally, the hind legs, though these never stretched. As far as they used to, Mrs. Harlowe's living room was a museum of quiet comforts. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner marked the passage of time with metronomic precision. Sunlight streamed through lace curtains, casting intricate shadows that shifted with the morning hours. The air carried the faint scent of lavender from the sachets tucked into the upholstery, undercut by the musty aroma of old books that lined the shelves. Misty had lived with Mrs. Harlowe for 8 years, 3 months, and 16 days. The elderly widow had taken her in when Daniel's mother could no longer care for her, handing over a cardboard box containing a well-chewed mouse toy, a slightly frayed red collar, and a note with feeding instructions. She prefers her water. Bowl away from her food, the note had read, and she'll beg for chicken, but don't give in. It upsets her stomach. The window was, as always, cracked open just enough to let in the breeze. Mrs. Harlowe insisted on fresh air, despite the autumn chill that had begun creeping into the mornings. Misty lifted her nose, sampling the outside world as she did every day. Cut grass, damp pavement, the neighbour's barbecue from last night, and then something else. A scent so faint she might have imagined it. Pine needles, leather, the crisp, citrusy cologne Daniel had worn since his 16th birthday. Misty's entire body went still. Her ears swiveled forward, her pupils dilating. That scent belonged to another lifetime, to memories buried deep beneath years of routine and gradual decline. The images came unbidden, rain pounding on cardboard, small cold hands lifting her from certain death. Daniel's face, round with childhood, dripping with rain as he tucked her inside his jacket. "It's okay," he'd whispered, his breath warm against her soaked fur. "I've got you." Across the room, Mrs. Harlowe snored softly in her armchair, a half-knitted scarf pooling in her lap. The television murmured some daytime program, the volume turned low enough to be unintelligible. Misty looked at the window, at the familiar living room, at her food bowl, still half full from breakfast, then back to the window. The screen was loose in the bottom left corner. She'd noticed it last summer when a particularly bold sparrow had landed on the sill. One good push would be enough. Her body ached at the mere thought of movement, but that scent, Daniel's scent, called to her in a way nothing had in years. With effort that made her muscles tremble, Misty pulled herself onto the windowsill. The screen bowed beneath her weight, then gave way with a quiet pop. Cool autumn air rushed in, carrying with it 1,000 unfamiliar smells. The world beyond was vast and terrifying, and somewhere out there, Daniel was waiting. Misty took a deep breath and stepped into the unknown. The drop from the windowsill to the flower bed below sent sharp jolts of pain through Misty's front legs. She lay still for a moment among the chrysanthemums, waiting for the ache to subside. The earth smelled rich and damp, stirring memories of digging in Daniel's garden, of the way he'd pretend to scold her before secretly admiring her handiwork. The street stretched before her like an impassable barrier. Cars roared past at speeds that made her head spin, their engines growling. Like predatory animals, Misty crouched low, her belly fur brushing against the cold concrete of the sidewalk. Every instinct screamed at her to turn back, to retreat to the safety of Mrs. Harlowe's predictable world. But then the wind shifted, and Daniel's scent wrapped around her like an embrace. Crossing required patience she hadn't needed in years. Her tail lashed nervously as she waited for a break in traffic. Her muscles coiled despite their protests. When the momentary lull came, she moved, a burst of speed that sent fire through her joints. A horn blared, tires screeched. Misty scrambled the final few feet to the opposite curb as a car's bumper grazed her tail fur, collapsing behind a fire. "Hydrant," she panted heavily, her heart hammering against her ribs. The close call left her trembling, but the scent trail was stronger now, pulling her deeper into unfamiliar territory. The hours that followed tested her in ways she'd forgotten possible. Alleyways became her refuge, their shadows hiding her from dangers both animal and human. A dumpster lid crashed down nearby, sending her scrambling beneath a parked car where the smell of oil and gasoline burned her nose. Somewhere, a dog's furious barking echoed off brick walls, the sound triggering instincts buried beneath years of domestic life. As twilight painted the sky in shades of violet and gold, Misty found temporary shelter beneath a rhododendron bush in someone's backyard. The cold earth seeped into her bones, and for the first time, doubt crept in. What if she was wrong? What if the scent was just a trick of memory? She was old, tired. Maybe her mind was playing cruel tricks. Then the wind carried it again, faint but unmistakable. And with it, another memory. The oak tree in Daniel's backyard. The one he'd fallen from when he was 12, breaking his arm but refusing to let go of her as they rushed to the hospital. The one where she'd waited for him every afternoon, watching for his bicycle to appear around the corner. New energy surged through her tired limbs. She was close. So close. Dawn found Misty limping through a neighborhood that tugged at her memory with each familiar landmark. The houses here stood farther apart, their yards sloping gently toward the street. Somewhere nearby, a woodpecker tapped out its staccato rhythm, and the air carried the damp, green smell of the creek where Daniel used to skip stones. But her body was failing. 3 days of travel with little food or rest had taken their toll. Her breathing came in shallow rasps, and a persistent cough had developed deep in her chest. The hunger pangs had faded into a dull ache, a bad sign she recognized from her earliest days of starvation before Daniel found her. Near a playground, she collapsed beside a discarded water bottle, lapping at the stale liquid that had pooled in its crumpled cap. The plastic left a bitter aftertaste, but her thirst outweighed the discomfort. "Mommy, look! A kitty!" Misty barely had the strength to lift her head as small feet pounded toward her. A child with pigtails knelt inches away, eyes wide with excitement. "She's so skinny," the girl whispered, reaching out with tentative fingers. The touch, though clumsy, was gentle. Misty lacked the energy to protest as small hands stroked her matted fur. "Lily, don't touch strange animals." A woman hurried over, her expression shifting from concern to pity when she saw Misty's condition. "Oh, you poor old thing." From her purse came a Ziploc bag of goldfish crackers. The girl spilled a handful onto the pavement, and Misty ate with a desperation that would have embarrassed her younger self. Each bite hurt her worn teeth, but the saltiness was heavenly. "We should take her to the vet," the woman murmured, examining Misty's frayed collar. She might be chipped. For a fleeting moment, Misty considered surrendering. These humans were kind. They might help her. Then the breeze stirred the trees, carrying that scent again, now mixed with something new. Coffee. Daniel always drank coffee in the mornings. As the woman reached for her phone, Misty gathered her remaining strength and slipped away, disappearing into the shrubs before the kind strangers could stop her. The oak tree stood at the crest of a hill, its massive branches shading what had once been a tire swing. The house beyond it had been repainted, no longer the pale blue of Daniel's childhood, but a warm beige, yet the shape of the porch, the curve of the driveway, they were all exactly as she remembered. Misty's legs gave out halfway up the front. Walk. The journey had taken everything from her. As darkness crept into the edges of her vision, she focused on the front door, pouring every ounce of her remaining will into that single point. Somewhere inside, a phone rang. A chair scraped against. Flooring. Footsteps approached. The door swung open and suddenly he was there. Daniel froze in the doorway, his coffee mug halfway to his lips. The man before her was both familiar and strange. The softness of childhood replaced by angular features, the dark hair now threaded with silver at the temples. But his eyes, those warm, hazel eyes, were exactly as she remembered. "Misty?" His voice cracked on the second syllable. The mug slipped from his fingers, shattering on the porch steps in a burst of ceramic and dark liquid. She tried to answer, but only a faint wheeze emerged. Her body refused to move, her strength utterly spent. Daniel was on his knees in an instant, his hands, so much larger now, hovering over her as if afraid she might disappear. "It can't be," he whispered. His fingers trembled as they brushed her fur, tracing the distinctive white mark on her forehead that had earned her name. A choked sob escaped him when she managed to lift her head just enough to bump against his palm. The scent of him enveloped her, pine and leather and coffee and home. "All these years," he murmured, carefully gathering her into his arms. His touch was feather-light, as if she might break. "I tried to find you after college, but Mom said she'd given you to a neighbor. Then when I moved back last year..." His voice broke as he carried her inside. The house smelled different, less lemon polish, more books and wood smoke, but the underlying essence remained. Daniel settled onto the couch, cradling her against his chest exactly as he had when she was a kitten. His tears fell warm against her fur. "You came back to me," he whispered. Misty purred weakly, the vibration rattling in her chest. Every ache, every pain faded beneath the rightness of this moment. She had made it. She was home. As evening shadows stretched across the room, Daniel built a fire in the hearth. He found an old fleece blanket, the same one she'd needed as a kitten, and made her a nest by the warmth. When he offered her pieces of roasted chicken from his dinner, she managed a few bites, savoring the way he smiled when she licked his fingers. Later, as the fire burned low and Daniel's breathing deepened into sleep, Misty allowed her eyes to close. Her final thought was of a rainy day long ago, of small hands lifting her from darkness, of a boy's voice promising, "I've got you," and he always would.